Okay. I want to start out. I'll apologize for not putting something out last week. If you remember my previous episode, I kind of had a cold and it turned into something worse. And so I'm recovering from it. Um, and I do want to end this quarter with the economic kind of outlook. And I'm going to be looking more to 2024, um, things that I think that people ought to be keeping track of for their businesses. Now, I'll be the first to admit that you go back and you read some of my old economic uh, updates that I've done at the end of each quarter. As Rick Rule often says, he's successfully called 15 out of the last three recessions, and I'll steal that line from him. I'm very pessimistic about the economy. Know that when you listen to me talk, it's survived on things that have made the economy worse: government spending, QE, keeping federal funds rate low for too long, and now overreacting and going the other way. All these are, I know, ultimately won't end well. Um, so the first thing I want to start out with is, what the recession probability, excuse me, is for uh, right now as people look back at the data. So looking at these data, you can see that right now it stands at 51.84%. Now it had gotten as high, for, I guess I didn't check these out quite as closely as I thought I did. Okay, so it's forward looking. Um, November 30th of 2024, 51% chance of recession. And you can see by May, 70%. So, look at all of these figures. This is at ycharts.com. Something I think is useful for a business owner or executive to kind of keep track of what the expectations are. You can tell the expectations are that the recession probabilities are going up, um, based off all the things I just talked about. Um, Now, one other thing I want to talk about, I probably haven't done anything on this in a while, are zombie companies. And zombie companies they're defined as, um, you know, companies that generate cash flow, uh, but they're so heavily indebted uh, to whoever, banks, etc., they can barely make, um, you know, their interest payments, um, and their fixed costs on a monthly basis, and then you know they can't pay off the actual bulk of the debt, and that would be a zombie company. And if you can think of most venture capital types of things, they often start. I mean, you look at what Amazon did. Now that's a success story, and everybody thinks they're going to be a success story, but you got to remember that probably 99% of them are not going to be a success story, and so they uh, fold under it. And with the QE, the things I just talked about, all the government spending, the QE, um, the artificially low Fed funds rate we had for a long time, with all those things, um, you're creating an atmosphere as interest rates have risen with the federal funds rate that some of this debt's going to be coming due. And according to some of the statistics I saw, 2 trillion in corporate debt will come due in 2024 and 2025, and this will result in higher interest payments. And those interest payments then are going to, or the interest expense, the increase in it is going to obviously require higher payments, and that equals loss of jobs. So it's I ask people, through, even though I've, like I said, successfully called 15 of the last three recessions, getting your financial house in order when the Fed was raising the federal funds rate was is valid, no matter whether the recession came or not, and it's coming. I don't see how we get out of it. We'll talk a little bit about that at the end. Um, Bankruptcies, uh, artificially low interest rates of the things that I just talked about, have led to a whole slew of really bad decisions. Everything from ESG to DEI to being green, which is part of ESG, to having 19 genders, to the woke mind virus, as Musk would say. These are all things from an artificially bloated economy we're not getting real growth. We're just, creating money and saying, oh, look how great everything is, because that's the way your political class wants to keep you, kind of fat, dumb, and happy. So anyway, the number of bankruptcies, we'll go back to the charts here. This is from tradingeconomics.com. And again, I would suggest any executive or business owner keep track of some of the data that are on here. I do this on a separate channel. I go through weekly, and I'll be honest with you, the other channel is more for me, kind of to keep track of it weekly, what's going on in the economy, and both the economy and the markets. But you can see the bankruptcies have continued to go up. Now, you look at, over time, this looks like it goes back to probably 1980 or 82, something like that. You can see it's been worse, but we also didn't have those low interest rates. But since 2008, we had this big increase in bankruptcies during the GFC, the Great Financial Crisis, and then they obviously started to hit with QE and the lowering of the Fed's fund rate and all the free money that's out there to get the economy going again, and shocked a lot of people. I'm a big follower of Peter Schiff, and when you look at these types of numbers, you start to see, okay, because his expectation was that we were going to go into something much deeper back in 2008. But the Fed, in its infinite wisdom, decided to save the economy. And they saved the economy by printing more money with QE. And then QE1, we'll only do this once. And then came QA2. And then came QE3. And so we've got all this money running through the economy. And the politicians that tend to be on the left say it's because companies are price gouging. It's not because companies are price gouging. It's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. It's not price gouging. They're just, companies are just turning over prices that they're getting from their suppliers. And what's happening is the printing of money is what creates the inflation. And that is the government responsibility. And we know for sure that politicians don't want to shine a light on themselves, because they couldn't be wrong. It couldn't be government spending. It couldn't be that the Fed did QE. It couldn't be that the Fed kept federal funds rate low for too long. It couldn't be any of those things, because, government's always right. And so instead, they go through this false claim that it's price gouging. It's asinine beyond belief from my perspective. So let me kind of end with the three possible outcomes that I see coming out of this. I mean, and this would be for anybody. It would be, you're either going to have inflation, you're going to have disinflation, or you're going to have deflation. And I'll give you the names of people that are talking about each one of these things. Now, if you're on the inflation side, which I think ultimately plays itself out, even if you get deflation, long-term inflation is going to take over. We just spent too much government spending. We're going to be forced to cut government. That'll be fun. I can't wait for the politicians to try and cover that one up, because they won't be able to when things get bad enough. But inflation is what Peter Schiff is is primarily talking about from where we sit today, immediately going into kind of a hyperinflation type of environment. Disinflation. Who wants disinflation? Well, what happens is instead of rates going up at, let's say, 2% or 5%, it goes to 4. That's disinflation. Go down to 3, disinflation. Go down to 1, disinflation. That is what everybody wants. Just get the rates lower. And who's promoting this? That would be Janet Yellen and Jerome Powell. Because if they're going to get their soft landing, this is exactly what has to happen, is disinflation. Then on the other end of things, with deflation, you have people like David Hunter, who basically says, we're going to get deflation first, and then the government's going to spend, I think he says something like $20 trillion in order for the government to be able to get the economy out of this deflationary spiral. Because, what happens is you get in the deflationary spiral, you've got lower prices, which everybody, yeah. And then all of a sudden, well, wait a minute, profits go down. Then employment goes down. So this is kind of, when it gets to deflation, this is where things can get really ugly. It's hard to get out of that spiral. And this is where you get really high unemployment rates, because everybody's, if think prices are going down, why would I be in a hurry to buy now? And I see people losing their jobs. I'm certainly not going to go out and buy things. And so this becomes a very bad pattern for people to be in. And so Hunter's expectation is that the government's going to spend some $20 trillion to get us out of that loop. And then after that, because we spent another $20 trillion on top of the $34 trillion we have now, we'll have something like $54 trillion in debt. Then we'll start to get the inflationary spiral to, I think he's talking of rates, 20-25% by the end of the decade. So these are just kind of putting things in your head so you can start to formulate in your mind what you may be looking at here in the future. If you're to look, 6 years down the road, or at least over the next 5 years, what potentially can happen. I don't think that Yellen and Powell's scenario plays out. I hope it does. Everything goes around. But, if you're a Keynesian, you'll love it, because then you can say, well, look, we just printed all this money. That's MMT, modern monetary theory. And boy, look how well it's working. And that's what you're getting from economists like Paul Krugman, because they're Keynesians. They believe that government has to be involved in everything, have its fingers in everything. Peter Schiff, on the other hand, libertarian, somebody who believes in Austrian economics, which is not studied here in the States enough, as our monetarists or any of the other portions. The rest of it gets a little murkier when you get into economics, because the different thoughts kind of start to meld together. You get a little Austrian, you get a little monetarist, you get a little supply side economics. You get a lot of different things from when you look at economic philosophies. But Peter Schiff's Austrian economics follower. If you don't know much about it, I suggest that you do. People really open their eyes when they see a different theory other than the one our government has placed in our brains through universities and other things, even though I'm not sure universities are even putting anything in people's brains anymore, or else we wouldn't be promoting communist types of ideologies. So those are the outcomes. Inflation, which I think is the ultimate end. Peter Schiff will be vindicated at some point, unless, of course, the Fed has some other QE type of thing that they can do, because Peter Schiff thought nobody's going to do QE. That would be suicide, to just print more money, because that's just going to come back to bite you in the butt later. Well, short-term thinking of economists or of government officials is, well, we'll do something today, and there'll be somebody else's problem tomorrow, but and it won't matter because I won't be here. Um, it's stupefying. But disinflation and deflation uh, is certainly a possibility. We'll see how these things play out, but I think it all plays out in 2024. You start to see whether this this is going to be just disinflation, whether we get the deflation. We'll start to see uh, some of those things come to fruition, and we'll see how much money we spend. That would be a good way to know. If they're trying to get us out of something, then you immediately see the federal funds rate cut. You'll see the 20 trillion in QE that Hunter's talking about, and that's just going to kick the can down the road. And when the bill comes due, it's going to be even worse than it is today. So, and a lot of people apparently that are politicians believe that's okay as long as they don't, they're elected. So that's the state of our government and our economy in the U.S. right now. Anyway, that's what I wanted to cover this week. And remember, there is always a better way. And in this case, it's probably Austrian economics.